Welcome, gentlemen. So this is going to be a video on priestcraft. Priestcraft is one of the most central aspects of manhood and masculinity. In men's work, we talk a lot about archetypes, and the priest is an absolutely central one. He is a spiritual warrior. He's a magician in that he has to understand the inner workings of the metaphysics of reality. And he's also a lover in that he has to mediate between the divine oneness of all things and reality. And he's also the channel of the king. And in this video, I'm going to argue that originally the role of the king and the priest were actually joined. And then they've kind of been separated into two. And in some ways, we're seeing that they're coming back together again. So to start off with, I have to give credit where it is due. Most of the inspiration, or almost all the inspiration for my talk here, is from the Lord of Spirits podcast. Father Stephen DeYoung and Father Andrew Damick are the two guys who run that. It's probably my favorite podcast, and they have an episode on exactly the world of priestcraft, which I highly recommend checking out if you enjoy this talk. It's considerably longer, but yeah, it's a really, really good podcast. And then I'll also, from the beginning, mention, so this talk here, these are two Christian priests, two Orthodox Christians, and this talk here I'm making is to try and put some of these ideas across for people who are not Christians. And so I will, however, still be referring to, our Christian foundation for our society, as well as the idea of God. And I think that idea of God is something which has kind of fallen out of our use in our everyday way of thinking. And a lot of people might think like, well, I don't believe in God, so none of this makes any sense to me. And I think, there's another way that we could start getting used to, it's like actually all of us, we do have something, even if we don't explicitly say we believe in a God or gods, then we act as if there are at least different gods in our life that we orientate ourselves towards. So one way of seeing this word is by understanding is like, what is at the center of our attention and our energy that we orientate our life towards? What is it that is the ultimate arbiter of truth and of value for us? So this could be science, it could be liberal democracy, it could be your career or your family, or money, or whatever it is, right? Whatever it is that is at the center of your attention, that's really what God is. So the Christians have an idea of what God is, and that's kind of orientated around the tradition and stuff like that. But we all have something that we put at the center, and that's how we know what it is that drives us in our life that we're trying to reach towards. And that can be a very unified thing, or it can be a very fragmented thing and split out over many different areas as well. But that's one way that you can still get value from this talk if you're watching this as a non-Christian. So to start off with, where the podcast from the Lord of Spirits starts with is with the biblical account. And it's really kind of, they track the biblical evolution of the role of priest. And so they start with the first priest in the Bible, which is, of course, Adam. And they start talking about how Genesis 1 and 2, the first two chapters of the entire Bible, is really an account from a specific genre of literature in the ancient Near East, which is the cradle of our civilization. And we see many different types of religions coming up. And they talk about a genre of literature called temple dedication texts. And how, you would expect these temple dedication texts to be kind of like, it's like we found this piece of land and then we made it flat or something like that, whatever it is, right? But actually what you find is that it's from the kind of instantiation of a temple and a deity for a local area. Then what we have these crazy stories a lot of the time, normally about like, wars between different gods and, the slaying of some god and using his body to create, the blood to create some humans or whatever it is, right? So kind of like creation myths. And they specifically talk about a ceremony which you saw very common in these pagan rituals was called the opening of the nostrils ceremony, for when you would build a statue or some kind of idol of a god, and then you would have a ceremony to open its nostrils so that the spirit of the god would then enter into the statue, and then you could then worship it. and they talk about how, you know, this is what the one example they bring out is in Genesis 1 and 2. Then instead it is God that forms Adam from clay, and then breathes into his nostrils the breath of life. So it's kind of like they do this a lot, where they talk a lot about how paganism kind of gets a lot of things right, but they also take the piss out of it a lot. These two guys, by showing how Christianity kind of inverts a lot of these elements and puts things in their right place, as it should be. And so in this text, then the job that Adam gets as a priest is it's formulated as to fill the earth and to subdue it. So he's put inside a garden where everything is good and in order, and outside of the garden there's still all the wilderness of creation. And Adam's job is really to get Eden to cover the entire earth. And that's what the biblical story is all about, really. It's about the kind of coming of the kingdom of heaven into the earth. And so this leads us to the kind of role of a priest, or a definition of what is a priest's job to be doing, which is really to, and the way they formulate it on this podcast is to be offering God to creation and offering creation back to God. So he offers God to creation by putting things in order, by naming things, or being the channel through which God is seen in the world. God is appearing in the world, and the works of God are done in the world. Or to be offering creation up to God, that's just through basically leading the prayer and worship of God, which is this centering of attention of people towards the highest point in the hierarchy of what that is, that kind of unified point of attention. So the priesthood in this way is not a job, and it's not a position of authority or power. It becomes that. But initially, its starting point really is a way of being in the world, a way of interacting with the world. So Saint Maximus talks about man as the microcosm and the mediator. So he's a man as a microcosm of the entire world, and he reflects the macrocosm of the world, and he mediates between these two things at the same time as well. So they talk about the nature of man, and this word, the nature of, it's actually, its initial meaning is talks about kind of like a directedness of being. So there's a teleological sense to our nature. It's not just a fixed thing, but man's nature. I think they quote Saint Basil, who says that the nature of the human being is the being whose end state is God. So the whole of human nature, this is the idea that man is created in the likeness and the image of God. So he's aimed towards God. Of course, when man is created in the story, then he's not there yet. But man is created as man and as woman. And so if his job is to set the world in order and to subdue it and to fill it with life, then man is the one who gets the primary responsibility for the setting in order of the world, and woman has the primary responsibility for the creation of life. And of course, they need each other to contribute and participate in each other's work as well. They can't do it by themselves. And it's through the sacrament or the mystery of marriage, which is the union of things in the correct way, that this can happen, which is kind of like a path to nearing God as well. And when these things don't work properly, obviously the best example is having children. Like you need a man and a woman to have children, and that can work in a very good way, but it can also be in a bad way. And so Leviathan and Behemoth are the kind of images, and there's also a whole podcast episode on Lord of Spirits on Leviathan and Behemoth, which is kind of like the tyrannical or chaotic way of those things coming into being. So as I said, then the podcast then goes through this kind of like evolution of priesthood through the biblical narrative, starting with Adam. And what they really start with focusing on is Adam's role then as the father, and the father as the leader of his family. and how, you know, if you look at all primitive societies, then we have the same pattern as well, as that human beings are kind of joined up into small family units where you would have, you know, 2 or 3 generations of people who are connected through common ancestry. Sometimes there would be, you know, a non-biological link coming in as well, but there would always be a good story that would kind of connect these people into feeling in the same grouping of people in a little clan. And at the top of that clan, there would be a single man. And that man would be the father of the tribe. Families were not the nuclear family, which is, you know, a new invention that we have really just from industrialization, where that's become a possibility. And, you know, they're really critical about the nuclear family, these guys. They kind of rant a little bit about it, and all the problems there are with seeing the family as such a small and limited group of people. Actually, you know, the family is the extended family as well. But normally then there is this priestly role at the top of the family. And, you know, if we look through all human civilizations, all religions, then you've had this idea of sacrifice. Sacrifice is a way of dealing with the guilt, shame, with the issues that we have of things that we do wrong or something like that. It's something that it seems like different human cultures have started doing automatically everywhere in the world. And the person leading these sacrifices was, of course, the father, the male leader of the clan, of the tribe, of this group of people. Who was there. And so they talk about how priesthood is a way of directing male energy. It's a specific vital part of masculinity. In the ancient Greeks, they talk about thumos, which is this kind of like striving towards glory of the male psyche, especially, or it's a specific masculine trait of like the warrior, or whatever it is. And so how that energy is channeled into priesthood, into this kind of striving towards God and leading a group of people towards a right relationship through this kind of mediation of you know, offering God to the people and offering creation up to God as well. And the equivalent for femininity, of course, is motherhood, which they say is about producing life instead of producing chaos. So not all men need to become like actual priests, and not all women need to become biological mothers, but all men and women are called to participate in priesthood and motherhood in some way. And there's many different levels that we can do that in many different aspects as well. So, you know, you could be, for a mother, you can be a mother of all kinds of things. You give birth to a project to, you know, to be taking a motherly role over for other younger women or something like that. And this thing of priesthood can be done in, you know, as an entrepreneur or many different kinds of settings as well, of being that mediator between a higher principle, uniting principle, and the, you know, the body of creation underneath as well. So in the biblical account, of course, what we see is how priesthood gets corrupted through this evolution that happens. I mentioned that priests started as tribal figures in small little clans, which then, you know, different clans joined together into a larger tribe. And what we end with is, you know, smaller states, city-states, or even going in towards empires. Probably the first empire was the Sumerian Empire. These guys are super nerds, and, you know, Father Stephen DeYoung especially can read Akkadian and knows everything about the Sumerian Empire. But basically what happens is, because this father leader role is joined with the priestly role, then what happens is that the priest posits himself as a kind of intermediary between creation and God. So he asserts himself, he imposes himself, and he then starts receiving the worship from the people towards himself. He deifies himself. And he also kind of, you know, the channel of communication doesn't go up to God, but he sees himself as the actual deity as well. So then it becomes his kind of law and order. He creates his family or his nation in his own image instead of in the image of God. So the idea is that the priestly role should be invisible. The person fulfilling this priestly role should become invisible. He should become a transparent channel of just you know, kind of being able to let these things flow through him. In the words of John the Forerunner, it is that I must decrease so that he must increase. But what we have instead is, instead of this kind of icon version, the icon is what points towards God, and you venerate the icon as a way of worshiping God. But instead you have idolatry. So an idol, and an idol could be an actual, like, statue that you can build, but anything can become an idol. So we have an image of anything that we look towards. It could be, again, money, the family, all of these things there. You can say they're kind of lesser gods, but what we have is actually we create idols out of them. We create a frozen image of it, and we kind of aim towards that. Could just be like, that holiday out in the jungle where I want to go to Thailand or something like that, and then we sacrifice on the altar of that idol as well. But we see people who are deliberately then create an idol out of themselves, and then stop that kind of free flowing of that, between the divine essence, or between God and the human being. So the priest king somehow interposes, and this is what you see when we talk about, like, the negative version of patriarchy, when you talk about at least the feminist version of patriarchy, or toxic masculinity in a kind of leadership role, then this is exactly what this idea comes from as well. So the result of this happens within the story of Moses, because Moses then, the story is that the Hebrew people are enslaved by a tyrannical Pharaoh in Egypt. Moses has to flee from Egypt because he murders somebody, and then he's out in the desert looking after some sheep, and then he sees a burning bush, and God is in this burning bush, and they have a conversation where basically God says, like, you need to go and free your people now. And he has all these kinds of excuses and lots of different, like, oh no, I can't do it, whatever, right? And then eventually he leaves, and then it turns out, like, while he's traveling back go back to Egypt, then it turns out that he is not circumcised, and neither of his sons circumcised. And his wife Zipporah is really pissed off about this, and so she she circumcises the son, like chucks the foreskin at him, as far as I understand it, and threatens to castrate Moses as well. But basically what we see is, because of Moses's failings as a father, as the father priestly king, and especially his priestly roles as the father, then the priesthood is fractured with Moses. And so, we had then all these plagues that happen in Egypt. The people leave, they go out into the desert. Moses goes up the mountain of Mount Sinai and receives the 10 commandments of the law, which is very much like the kingly, this is the first like real law that they have established. And comes down, and then the people have melted down all their gold and turned it into a calf, and they're worshiping and basically having a big sex orgy down there as well, a kind of pagan orgy. And so what happens is that Moses smashes the tablets, gathers together the Levi tribe, which then becomes the priestly caste, and they stand together, they take out their swords, and they go and they kill 4,000 men in the camp. And from here, this is where you see then that the priest and the king are separated. Moses takes on the kingly leadership role, and the Levites take on the priestly role, where Aaron, the brother of Moses, or his brother-in-law, is then the high priest, and then his sons become like the serving priest underneath him. But the whole tribe of Levi is then the kind of priestly tribe as well, which take on those roles. And so fatherhood and priesthood are separated. It's no longer the father of the family or the leader of that little clan that's doing the sacrifices or the priestly tasks, but instead it is a separated group of people who are doing this, who are then trained, of course, to become priests in that way. So this, this essential aspect of leading, serving, guiding, protecting, and providing for one's family. It's this natural aspect of priesthood and of leading, of combining the priest and the role. These are kind of separated. And so in the New Testament, then St. Paul, he talks about how the grace for doing the work of a priest really comes from one's own family. And a man who doesn't know how to, husband his wife and be a father for his children will also lack some of the skills and the things that are necessary in order to lead a group of people as well. And so these things need to be connected as well. And the guys on the Lord of Spirits podcast, and they talk about a lot about the men's works movement, the kind of work that we're doing here in Manifesto, really. But they also talk about how a lot of it is kind of putting out an image out in the public sphere about what a real man looks like, and how that's kind of, can be driven by an actual hidden insecurity or a neuroticism about not feeling, I need to get confirmation of other people about what a real man is. And there's certainly a lot of doubt or insecurity about that in our society today, as it's being challenged with what is a real man. And their point that they have is that, if you're not actually a husband and a father, then there are severe holes in our understanding of this as well. So these things are directly connected to family. I think Jonathan Peugeot talks a lot about how, we have these multiple levels of hierarchy in a fractal system, and we need these kind of like close packed interconnected layers of hierarchy where, the basic, you have, of course, the level of the individual, but the individual is often connected into a family and a close local community as well. And when we kind of separate out all the intermediary institutions between the individual and the state and the IT tech giants, then we just have lots of individuals who are kind of like rising up and pushing themselves as some kind of icon or idol of masculinity, then sometimes there's not a proper embedded connection to it. So humility is probably the biggest challenge that we have when it comes to the priestly role, and that's also what the two fathers say in this talk, is that, as they say, like, this is the constant for an actual priest, especially as well, is to be finding humility, to be able to, again, become that transparent channel that can mediate between that which is above and that which is below. So they also talk about another example, which is really the story of rebellion, which is what we just see playing out all the time today. In the biblical story, it is the sons of Korah. Korah is one of the tribe of Levi. Him and his sons, they kind of raise up and say, well, isn't everybody holy? And don't we all have just as much access to this as possible? Why should it be Aaron that's up at the top or something like that? And what happens, so basically, yeah, these guys, they get swallowed up. The earth actually opens up and swallows them. It says it takes them directly down to hell. And if you're reading the story and you think like, well, who is this God guy anyway, and what is this all about? Then that doesn't really make sense, or it seems like really strange. But if you see the role of the priest as setting things in order, of putting the world into alignment with the principles that will create harmony and bring about the kingdom of God, then rebellion against that order, whatever it is what the problem is as well. So yeah, this is something that one can wrestle with, of course. But what we see is a picture of how Adam has this task of naming and subduing and putting the world into order, and Eve has the role of filling it with life. And this first of all starts off in the family, and as it works there, then it can kind of expand out into a greater and greater sphere. And with this idea of priesthood, then there's this kind of like levels of concentric layers of rings, where the innermost layers have the strongest responsibilities, and also are called to a higher level, a higher standard of being, or a higher level of holiness, one could call it. So, in the Old Testament account, then you have Aaron, who is the high priest, and there's specific things that he has to do. He basically has his entire life is very strictly directed, and his actions are incredibly directly prescribed exactly how it should be that. And then his sons have specific things that they have to do as well, which are also very clearly defined. From there, you have the entire tribe of Levi, and there are standards that the tribe of Levi is held to, which the rest of Israel is not held to as well. So each layer is a priest to the layer that's outside of them as well. And then finally, even the entire tribe of Israel is seen then as priestly in its role to the 70 nations, which is all the other nations of the world outside in this biblical account. So each layer has a priestly role to the layer that's outside of it, somehow like that. And of course, that's what we have today in many ways as well. We have a priestly caste in some ways, or we have a modern priestly caste, which are often like the influencers that we have on social media. So a lot of the times then our gods are status or money or social justice or freedom. It could be strength, or it could be beauty, it could be physical fitness, but these can all be good things. But when they're not represented in a way that points beyond the person that is holding them, but they're kind of, just seen as the most central point of identity for the community that forms then underneath that, then they become a religious, they become an idol in a religious system, which then functions and aims towards that, but it kind of stops there as well. And so this priestly role is about, being that transparent mediator and pointing beyond yourself all the time. And of course, in the biblical story, then Christ is the ultimate high priest. He is God and he is man. So he's the perfect combination of things to be able to perform this role perfectly, because he actually is those things himself as well. And so we don't know a lot about Christ from a kind of first-hand perspective, but there is a mystery around it, and this is kind of what it is. And one of the things that I think is a stumbling block for a lot of people is this idea, well, why is God a man, or why is Jesus a man? And I think the way of understanding it is like kind of saying, well, he is the high priest. And so God is not a man. He's not a woman either. God doesn't have a gender. But in these concentric circles, then in a hierarchy, everything that, you're always masculine to that which is below you, and you're feminine to that which is above you in the spiritual sense. So that doesn't mean that women are always underneath men or something like that. That's a misunderstanding of what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, we're always below God. God is always above us. And so in a spiritual sense, we're in this feminine receptive state towards God. We can't tell God what to do. We're not imposing the law on God. God imposes law on us. Even if you have a lesser God, you can worship Thor or something like that, but you can't compete with him, right? You have to be receptive to him, Of course, there's plenty of pagan stories where people do compete with the gods, but it doesn't always go very well. So yeah, that's why we have Father Sky and Mother Earth. These things that, in a spiritual sense, this is the way that things work out for us as well. And so one of our challenges that we have in our society today is that we've rejected the idea of a priest, but priesthood, the archetype of the priest, is embedded into the very nature of reality. And so the shadow priest comes out, the tyrant priest, the priest who interposes himself, and it becomes more about him than about what it is. And this is even the case just in the church, in the Christian church. Large portion of the entire Protestant church does not have priests. They reject the idea of priests. And so what happens is that our entire understanding of the working of the priest gets put aside. And what happens then? Well, then you still have priests in function, but the way that priest works gets influenced by the secular culture. And so I think probably, this is what they talk about, the two most common types of priests that we see today is the CEO priest, which is like the mega church, where you have a guy who takes on this priestly role, but it all becomes about leading a business almost, or something that has to grow and expand. It's like an empire almost, where that becomes the teleos, the nature of it, the thing that it's aimed towards. Or you have the caregiver priest. And this is why we also see that women are starting to very naturally take on this priestly role in most churches today, is because women are naturally very good at caregiving as well. And so, in the kind of face of like, oh no, we mustn't be like the tyrannical, or at least, the dominant masculine kind of priest, then instead we have this caregiving one where it becomes a very kind of a nurturing role. And, growing is good and caregiving is good. But again, these are two idols that are a limited version of what it is. When we talk about God, we talk about the apophatic understanding of him. Like there is whatever you try and define him as, he's not that. So we can only say what God is not. We can only say that it's beyond a description. Anything that we try and limit him to, that would be a limitation, but God is beyond limits as well. So these are mysteries that we can't really understand, especially not on a YouTube video. So what Father Andrew on this podcast finishes off with, and I'll mention it as well, because it's one of my favorite essays by J.R.R. Tolkien, and his as well, is an essay he wrote on fairy stories, where he talks about fairy stories as a way of accessing another world somehow, and just this idea of storytelling of kind of can bring to life reality in a deeper way. And so he talks about how priestcraft is really about becoming a storyteller, and through telling stories from our ancient tradition, which our culture is built upon, and which brings out some of these very, very powerful underlying aspects of the way that reality works in a way that that can just bring things to clarity and crystallize them in a way, just in a very simple telling of stories. This is a way of kind of actually giving people an encounter with otherworldliness. So it's not about, a lot of people, when you think about religion, and this is true for Christianity, but it's also true for the woke religion, or for the climate change religion, or for whatever other religion that we're seeing from the priestly caste these days, right? You're seeing that it's become like this power struggle to try and use the political system to kind of instantiate the values of the religion in the broader society as well. And this is a terrible idea, right? It doesn't work. It becomes dysfunctional when you do this. So, especially if you look at kind of like how we have a society which is based on Christian values, but you've removed the Christian foundation, then instead what you have is a power struggle about who can kind of live out a specific set of Christian values, which are in some ways, difficult to unite without the foundational aspects of the religion. So what you see is like, basically the left, who are kind of saying like, no, we need to like, provide for and feed people who are underprivileged through state resources. So we have to like use the state to look after the people that we don't feel like looking after ourselves. This is the modern welfare state. Or we have other people saying like, no, we have to like stop people from committing these specific types of sins, which are really, really bad. And we have to force them not to do that through the political system as well, which is, again, this isn't something that we can force people to do through politics. It comes through a natural orientation to the heart, and through this understanding of like, a connection through good priesthood or priestcraft, that this can happen. So what happens is that people get lost and confused, and it turns into this power struggle, which can go otherwise. And this idea that which Jonathan Pajot talks a lot about, I can really recommend watching his video called Weaponized Compassion, which you basically see both sides of the political spectrum are using kind of Christian values of compassion to appeal to something in a weaponized way for actually attaining power for themselves. This is a lot of what modern politics is about. And I say that as a political scientist and a person who's been very involved in politics in Denmark as well. So yeah, priestcraft, central aspect of being a man, important thing to understand, and you can't separate it from our foundation of the Abrahamic Judeo-Christian faith. It's in the DNA of our society if you're living in the West. So yeah, if you found this interesting, I highly recommend go check out Lord of Spirits. I'll put the link into the description of this video here. Yeah, let me know if you have any thoughts about priestcraft. And that was it. Thanks.